Hi everyone and welcome to the Fireside Chats. I'm Heather Jassy. I'm Senior Vice President of Members and Community here at Etsy. The Fireside Chats are really a way for us to speak to you, to have more ways for us to connect with one another and for us to get a chance to talk about new products and features here at Etsy and also to answer your questions. In an ideal world, we would be able to have lots of people in the room and answer any question that came up, but we need to get the right people in the room to be able to answer your questions, so we focus them on different themes every month. I do want to give one verbal disclaimer, which is that everything in this is true as of today, but as we know, things frequently change. So if you watch this in the future, please take that into account and know that some of the information may have changed. We have today with us Arpan Podduturi. He's the Director of Product Management at Etsy, where he works on new programs to help sellers expand their businesses. We're going to discuss how we help Etsy sellers succeed by giving them tools to build buyer trust and tell their unique stories about their businesses. This is going to be a major theme in the updates and tools that we create in 2016, and we thought it would be really good to take time to dig into this and talk about why we think it's important, why we've chosen to focus on it, and give you a little bit more insight into what happens behind the scenes around this. I think people are going to be really excited to hear that Arpan's been involved in a lot of things that sellers have been really excited about this year. So welcome, Arpan.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Let's see. So I want to hear, I'd love for you to tell sellers a little bit about when you joined Etsy, what you were doing previously, and
Sure.
what brought you here.
Yeah, I joined Etsy in 2011, and I was working at the Walt Disney Company before. And I had a bunch of jobs, but my last one was at ESPN, and I was getting to work on their mobile apps. And it was sort of this wild time because it was right after the iPhone launched and right around when the App Store and iPad launched. And it was just kind of this really unique opportunity to work on this technology that would take off over the next, 9 years or so. So that was the sort of transition into Etsy.
And you originally came to Etsy to work on mobile, is that correct?
Yeah, I started on the mobile team and worked on Etsy's first apps, the buyer app and Sell on Etsy, which so many sellers are using.
Yeah. Cool. So let's see, let's just talk a little bit about how your role may have changed over the years. So you originally came to work on mobile apps. How has it evolved and what are you focusing on now?
Etsy has been really aggressive in sort of thinking about mobile. Like when we started, we had a really small mobile team and I was working with a bunch of designers and engineers and building these apps kind of in a silo. And over time, as mobile became a really big thing, we decided that essentially every team that was building software at Etsy should be thinking about mobile. So today you have teams that are working on things like combos and they're thinking about, a seller may be getting a combo on a phone, they may open it but not have a chance to sort of answer it. So they mark it as unread and come back to it on a desktop. And it's sort of that ability to think across screens and sort of design for this world where we're all kind of connected with phones and computers. And that made it sort of possible for us not to have a mobile team. So my role has changed over the years where today I focus on seller services, which are essentially tools and programs that give sellers different options on how they want to scale their businesses. We're
not focusing specifically on mobile today, but I thought it might be interesting for sellers. You sort of referenced how Etsy's been really aggressive about mobile and why that's important. Could you just give sellers a little bit of context and background on why we think that's important, or what's changed over the years to make that more important?
When I started, mobile was just a tiny part of Etsy's kind of overall traffic, and now it's a huge part of traffic. It's over
how buyers are shopping.
Right. Yeah. It's how buyers are shopping, and sellers are more and more, running parts of their businesses from their apps or their phone. So, we've had to really think about how the services that we build work. They go from this large screen from a desktop, and we shrink them down. And I know there's been a lot of seller education about kind of how sellers can approach that problem too, like how their shop scales down from a desktop to a phone. And I think it's very similar to what we do. We're thinking about those experiences and how they work across all of these screens.
Yeah, okay. So even though you focus a lot on seller services for sellers, I understand you have to think a lot about buyers in your work. Can you tell me why it's important to think about buyers
Yeah.
in your work?
Our primary goal is absolutely to help sellers succeed and to figure out, what are their needs, how can we make their lives easier, managing their business more efficient, helping them reach, more buyers. And that last part is really important because basically for every feature that we're building, we want to understand, how will buyers react? Will it entice them to want to shop, to want to browse, to want to check out? And so as we're building new features, we're interviewing sellers, we're interviewing buyers, and we're really looking for that kind of sweet spot in the middle where it makes sense to both sides.
Right. Because if it's good for sellers, but it doesn't make sense to buyers, then sellers aren't going to get sales and the traffic that they're looking for. How do you get at that data? How do you get that information? What's the process like?
We have an amazing research team at Etsy, and almost every day they're interviewing sellers, about some feature, some product, some service that we're thinking about, and we're constantly working with them. We're also looking at kind of the big user sort of data that we have about what features are being used, what aren't being used, how are buyers interacting with a page, are there opportunities to make the page sort of more user-friendly. So we're looking at quantitative data, qualitative data, interviews, and we're doing surveys. And I think it's just kind of that confluence of all those things where we're trying to figure out, what's the best path forward.
I think prototype teams are such a great part of that at Etsy. It's
Totally.
Something I love so much. So one of my favorite releases lately has been shop videos. I've personally wanted that as long as I've been at Etsy. I was so excited to see that, and spent a lot of time watching those videos. I love them. Can you walk us through how the process played out with shop videos?
Totally. We spent a lot of time first doing kind of competitive research and realizing that video had become a big part of e-commerce, and video had been had turned into a really powerful way to tell your story. And we wanted to bring that to Etsy, and so we interviewed a bunch of sellers, and we were just trying to figure out kind of what were the things that they wanted to tell, and what were the kind of maybe the speed bumps in the process.
Sure.
And what we found out was being on camera, it's a different experience. It can create anxiety. You're not sure what to say, and so we really kind of took this approach where we wanted to make the process really accessible. So we built this step-by-step tutorial in the Sell on Etsy app, and we kind of we provided sort of stock music and things like that to warm up the videos, and just with those prompts, we've already seen some really good kind of some seller videos that have already come in.
Yeah, cool. What do you feel is unique about shopping on Etsy?
I think shopping on Etsy is the most unique part is the human connection, and as more and more commerce sort of moves from Main Street to e-commerce, one thing we've lost is that personal touch and that interaction with the store owner or the seller or the maker, and the ability to personalize and have that relationship. And that's something that I feel like Etsy's been able to do so well. It's a little bit of a throwback. There are no other e-commerce experiences where you're getting a handwritten note from the seller, or where a buyer will take a photograph of themselves wearing the item that you made.
Yeah.
And I think that stuff, that sort of loop of connection is really special.
We're going to transition now to talking a little bit about buyer behavior, because I know it's something that really interests sellers who want to get in the minds of buyers to understand how can my shop get found, how can I make buyers want to buy what I'm selling. And I think this is really interesting because you talked earlier about that sweet spot between buyers and sellers. I think that this stuff is really meaty and great for sellers because not only do these tools really let sellers tell the story of their brands and their businesses and their personhood, which is such an important part of expressing their creativity. But also what we've learned is that the more sellers tell their stories, actually the more buyers want to buy what they have. And so it really increases the amount of trust that buyers have. So we can talk a little bit about all of that. So you recently wrote an in-depth article in the Seller Handbook, and you explained buyer trust is going to be a theme this year. How how do you think about buyer trust?
I think about it in a couple ways. I think the first way is there's just a really practical way
Yeah.
to think about it. Like when you're buying online, you can't feel or touch the item. You can't see it in real life. So
Yeah.
there's an aspect of it that's just sort of capturing your stuff in a really accurate way. And there's another aspect that is just about presenting yourself and your whole story and who you are. And we've done some research with buyers, and we've learned that buyers are actually willing to pay more. A majority of our buyers are willing to pay more when they understand who made the item. And I think there's a lot that goes into that, but at a very practical level, it's, do you have an about page? Have you thought about telling your story? Do you have clear policies? Do you have an avatar and an accurate location?
Yeah.
There's a handful of things that I think all of our sellers can do and should do to sort of convey that trust to your buyers that you're a real person and you're the person behind this business.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk about some of the features that you built in 2015, and then we can talk about, you hit on some of those specific things sellers can do. We can give even more tips around that. So let's talk about some things that launched in 2015.
Yeah. 2015 was a really sort of big year for beginning this idea and this theme. And we'll do a lot more in 2016. But in 2015, the first thing we launched were shop updates. Shop updates are a really easy way to take a photograph of something that is inspiring you as a seller, as a maker, as a vintage seller, as a supplier. Any sort of type of seller on Etsy, I think, can tell that interesting story about why they've selected an item, why they've made an item. And shop updates make that really, really easy. It's right from the Sell on Etsy app.
I love when people include photos from their creative process, or their something's in the middle of being created, or picture of the studio. It's so much fun.
It's just that sort of look behind the scenes.
Yeah, absolutely.
The second thing we launched was Shop Icon, which is it's a small kind of image, but it goes with your buyers wherever they are, and I think that's really important. So if you're in checkout on a receipt, if you're being found in search, this icon represents your brand, and I think that is it can be the introduction, it can be the thing that people remember about your business. So I think it's a really important little asset. Yeah,
and it sort of gets carried through the whole purchase process, so that buyers really distinguish that brand.
Right.
Yeah. Cool. Let's see. We talked a little bit about shop videos. Those are just so exciting. So, what all these have in common is about, again, helping sellers really tell the story of the brand, and also helping buyers understand who's behind the product, which makes them feel better about purchasing it. So, let's talk about some of those specifics that sellers can do, specific things that sellers can do to build the buyer trust. What does that mean? You hit on some of those things. You talked about policies. Yeah.
I think that all sellers should be looking at their shop kind of top to bottom, and looking at sort of how their branding is coming through. If they're telling it sort of a complete and coherent story about their business. Obviously, the about page is a great way to sort of tell the background of your business, including your social links and where they can find you on the web. And then I think policies are really, really important. And policies are often sort of hard and daunting to put together, but I think the key with policies is that from all of our buyer research, we found that the more concise and sort of straightforward you can be, the easier it is for buyers to understand, and that's really important.
Yeah, I think another important piece of this is getting good feedback by being really responsive, and I think that shop policies really play into this, because they're really a means of not only making the buyer feel safe buying from you, but they also set expectations for buyers about how long your shipping will take, all these sorts of things. And so if you have policies in place, you're less likely to have a case filed against you if something doesn't go well, or the item doesn't arrive. Maybe the buyer doesn't have realistic expectations because they haven't seen policies. So I just think it's just so incredibly important. I know one thing a lot of feedback I've heard from people over the years is that it can be hard as a newer seller to do maybe the about page. And so we've got a lot of great education about that, but maybe people don't yet have a way to talk about their brand or their business, but they can talk about their process or what led them to this. So I think there are great ways of just getting started and putting that information there, because we definitely know that it makes a difference to buyers.
For sure.
Yeah. Let's see. So, with all this emphasis on sharing more about products and the story as the shop owner, we've also heard, from some sellers that privacy is a concern, like they don't want to show the face or be on camera, share personal images or info. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, it's totally optional as to what you want to share, and you as a business owner can decide what you're comfortable with, and you should. But we really encourage you to, as a seller, to share sort of as much as you feel like you're willing to do, because it is really important in kind of presenting this full picture of your brand.
Yeah.
And even details like, where you're from, where your shop is located, all of these things sort of form this picture that, again, that you're a real person, that you have your business, and you're real.
Yeah. I've also seen really great examples of sellers who didn't feel comfortable sharing as much information or having their photos shown, but they, showed pictures of the process or pictures of their hands or their studio or things that may feel less less private to share, but they still had a great way of sort of telling the story. And I definitely got a sense from looking at it that, like, there's a person here. They're really, I can get a sense for what their business is and what they're doing. So people found a lot of creative ways to. There
are some really cool kind of sketches of avatars. There's some really cool kind of digital avatars. I saw one shopper, La Touchables, who had basically an open palm with a tomato. And it just really worked in the space. Like, I was looking at her shop and it just totally worked. So there's a lot of creative ways to do it.
What I'm hearing here is it's better to do something than do nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Let's see. You just gave me one example, but I wanted to ask for another. I love how all this comes together to create ways for people to tell their stories. Can you think of any others that were examples of things you really liked?
One of our really early videos that we got in was from Hannah Stevenson from Lily and Thistle, and she makes these really beautiful, intricate paper dolls. And she talks about how she got started and sort of her life. Her day job as a mom and her night job as an artist. And I just thought that was a really sort of great kind of story that just, it's just an Etsy story.
Yeah.
And that was one that felt, very, very kind of brand appropriate, very personal, very meaningful, and it just, it made me as a shopper want to support Hannah.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we go, since we're talking about people telling their stories, what's one thing that people here may not know about you?
A bunch of years ago, I started DJing.
Oh, nice.
And I was a DJ in New York. And amongst friends and family today, I'm known as DJ PJ because I throw a good late night dance party in pajamas.
I love that. Let's see. So I would also, that's the end of our questions. Thank you so much.
Sure.
I would also encourage all of you to check out Arpan's recent blog post on the Seller Handbook. I think it's really great and gives a lot more background information on some of the topics we've talked about here. As always, if you have questions for our support team, you can request a call from phone support or email them by going to etsy.com/help. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.